last week we looked at the Johannine chronology. I'm probably saying that wrong. I just read it. I don't hear it said a lot, so who knows. Anyway, so we looked at the John chronology, the hypothesis. And I said that we were going to keep giving little teasers here and there. And so this week, we'll just look very, very briefly at the Synoptic Hypothesis, or the Synoptic tradition. And this, of course, is the idea that the Synoptics are right, and that the Passover was actually held, or the Last Supper, rather, the Last Supper was actually held on the Nisan 14, the day that the lambs were sacrificed, and basically people who hold to this hypothesis, they either think that there's multiple things that could be going on. Maybe the language is different, or maybe there's a separate tradition. That's a famous one. That there's when we were looking at the John hypothesis, I was trying to show that there are people who believe that there's two traditions, one in the Synoptics, and then one in John. And so people who hold to this, scholars who hold to this, a lot of the scholars will say that there was two traditions going around. Those who hold to the Synoptic tradition, or the Synoptic hypothesis, believe that some of them believe that John specifically moved his chronology so that Yeshua would die at the same time as the Passover lambs were being slaughtered on Nisan 14. And if you remember from last week, sundown on Nisan 14 becomes Nisan 15, and that's the festival Shabbat, right? And so I'll just read a couple of reasons why people would hold to the Synoptic hypothesis before we move on. Matthew 26:17, now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yeshua and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And that word there is Pascha. Another place would be Mark 14:12. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they were sacrificing the Passover lambs, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" Pascha. And then, of course, Luke 22:7. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And if you remember last week, we talked about John 18:28. When it says they led him to the praetorium. This is after the meal, right? The next morning, they led him to the praetorium. And the high priest didn't want to enter because they were afraid they'd become unclean, and they wanted to eat the Pascha. So it seems like there's obvious contradiction here between what the Synoptics and what John is telling us. So that we're not going to try.
That's a deep rut, right? In New Testament studies or gospel chronology studies, is the putting the Synoptics on one side, and then having John deliberately paint the picture as like a narrative midrash of Yeshua actually being the lamb, and so that's the way it's been characterized. And what part of this teaser is, Caleb, if I'm right, is that we're coming to propose an alternative view that challenges that deep-rooted tradition of dividing of pitting John against the Synoptics.
Yes, and not only, next week what we'll do, so for those who haven't tuned in before or don't know, we're anticipating and hoping that we will be able to have Dr. Brant Petrie on the show for our Passover special, which will be, I believe, on April 12th. And so Dr. Petrie he's taken scholarship that has already been put forward. He's compiled it all and then expanded it and made what he calls the Passover Hypothesis, something that I've held to for several years now, something that my father wrote about in 2008. And so this is the theory that we're going to have him talk about. So what we're trying to do with these teasers is just kind of set up, this is what this hypothesis is. This is what this one is, so that when we get to Petrie, we don't have to spend time going over, in depth what all these different hypotheses are. And so next week we'll look at the Essene hypothesis, just briefly, which is that both are right. And this is kind of an innovative way to look at it.